Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. We're thrilled to have you at USAID's Climate Monitoring, Evaluation, and Learning series. Today, we are focusing on climate adaptation reporting. My name is Chelsea Kay, and I'm a Climate Adaptation and Resilience Advisor in the Center for Resilience in the Bureau for Resilience, Environment, and Food Security. And I'm joined by my colleague.
And I'm Lutfia Farhodova, Senior MEL Specialist at the same Bureau.
Today, we will provide a detailed overview of climate adaptation indicator measurement and reporting guidance. You are always welcome to reach out to us with any questions or suggestions. So this video will provide guidance to help you report on climate adaptation. At the end, you have a better understanding of what should be counted and how to count it. We'll begin with myth busting to clarify common misconceptions around climate adaptation. Next, we'll go into the introduction to set the stage for our discussion. We'll then transition to reporting guidance that will cover an overview of adaptation indicators, and then we'll go into in-depth measurement reporting on our priority indicators, which are economic growth 11.4, which is focusing on finance mobilized for climate adaptation, and economic growth 11.5, people supported to adapt to climate change. At the end, we'll share additional resources and points of contact to guide you for further support. To start, let's address some misconceptions around adaptation. These myths can sometimes lead to misunderstandings in programming and reporting. As we go through each myth, think about whether you've encountered these in your work. And if it's true, say out loud true or false. Let's get started. Number 1, adaptation means reducing carbon emissions. Do you think this is true or false? This is false. Adaptation is about adjusting to climate change, while mitigation reduces greenhouse gas emissions. For example, farmers planting crops that are more drought resistant will help them adjust to current climate impacts. This is adaptation. On the other hand, installing solar panels to reduce reliance on fossil fuels addresses the root cause of climate change by reducing emissions. This is mitigation. On to number 2. Adaptation is a sector. Do you think this is true or false? This is also false. Climate adaptation is not a sector, but instead is an integral part of all sectors. On the screen, you'll see a few examples of climate adaptation in various sectors. Throughout this presentation, we'll look at examples from lots of different sectors that have taken an adaptation approach. Let's move on to number 3. Only activities funded by adaptation dollars should report to adaptation indicators. True or false? This is also false. Reporting adaptation results is required as applicable, regardless of funding type. Every time you have an adaptation result, we want you to report it. Let's take an example. A water supply, sanitation, and hygiene funded activity trains individuals in watershed co-management. Within the training, climate risks are addressed and individuals trained deepen their understanding of climate vulnerabilities and adaptation solutions for management of the watershed. This activity has achieved adaptation results even though it's funded by water supply, sanitation, and hygiene funds. So what should you report? You should report the number of individuals trained under economic growth indicator 11.1, people trained in adaptation. And if the people trained engaged in improved watershed management, you can also count them under EG.11 which is number of people supported to adapt to climate change. Myth number 4. My activity should only report results to one of the climate pillars indicators. True or false? This is a tricky one. This is also false. Actually, programmatic results achieved can be reported across all 3 climate pillars: adaptation, clean energy, and sustainable landscapes in most cases. We say most because this excludes climate finance indicators, which cannot be cross-reported. Let's take another example. So if an activity supports expanding climate-smart agriculture, the results might be relevant for both adaptation and sustainable landscapes. And since those indicators are never summed together, you can report to both with no fear of double counting. All right, our final myth. I should only count beneficiaries that my activity reaches directly. What do you think? It's a myth. False. Adaptation interventions frequently have impacts beyond direct beneficiaries in the project. Some indirect beneficiaries might be people who benefit from improved access to information, services, or technologies that result from your activity. Let's take one more example. If a malaria activity takes into account climate risks, you may count household members of direct beneficiaries who receive the intensified malaria prevention and treatment. And we'll talk more about how you would measure that number later in this presentation when we show you more on this measurement approach. Now that we've dispelled some common adaptation myths, let's review some of our adaptation basics. So, what is adaptation? We know climate risks can't be eliminated, but with effective adaptation, the negative impacts on people and economies can be reduced. Climate resilient development helps minimize the costs and consequences of climate impacts with a goal of not reversing development gains or hindering progress towards development goals in the future. So in short, climate adaptation is the process of adjusting to the changing climate. Adaptation is about planning ahead, saving lives and jobs and saving money in the process, making infrastructure more resilient, agriculture more productive, water systems more secure, and communities more disaster ready, all in the face of a rapidly changing climate. Adaptation helps people, communities, systems, and countries anticipate, prepare for, and adapt to current and future climate impacts. Work supporting adaptation to climate change is not new. USAID has been working on adaptation for a long time, and our current work builds on our previous lessons learned and good practices. USAID's climate strategy, launched in 2022, sets out 6 ambitious high-level targets. You can see that on the slide, and is a whole of agency strategy, meaning everyone has a role to play in helping achieve these targets. The first 2 targets are focused primarily on climate mitigation by reducing greenhouse gas emissions. However, they can also be designed to achieve adaptation co-benefits. Our adaptation work best contributes to the 4 targets highlighted in the red box: supporting 500 million people to adapt, mobilizing $150 billion in climate finance, supporting 80 countries through their nationally determined contributions or national adaptation plans, and strengthening 40 country partnerships to increase equitable engagement by critical populations. To count our progress towards supporting 500 million people to adapt, we use indicator EG.11, and to count our progress towards mobilizing $150 billion in climate finance, we use indicator EG.11. To achieve these ambitious targets in the climate strategy and implement sustainable development work, all of our missions and implementing partners will need to contribute however they can to this adaptation goal. And doing this involves something called mainstreaming, which means including climate considerations into every sector, activity, project that USAID works in. You can mainstream adaptation into programming by using climate information and decision-making, ensuring country policies integrate adaptation, mobilizing climate adaptation finance, integrating private sector engagement, or using nature-based solutions. Now let's take a look at a few sector examples that use the climate adaptation approach. In agriculture, this might mean implementing climate-smart agriculture to protect livelihoods from climate risks, such as drought. Under water resources, you might support developing a climate information service platform that can inform water resource management. If you work in an urban context or with infrastructure, you can build infrastructure that is more resilient to extreme heat or flooding that can help reduce vulnerability. For our global health colleagues, healthcare systems can help communities adapt by planning for climate-related risks like heat stress. For our colleagues working in democracy and governance, empowering underrepresented groups to participate in and lead climate actions can ensure that adaptation efforts are both inclusive and wide-reaching. Finally, mobilizing investment from the private sector can spur innovation and solutions that every sector needs to adapt to climate change. There are many, many more examples that would fit on this slide. Now I'll hand over to my colleague Lucia to talk about how we can monitor the performance of these interventions.
Thank you, Chelsea. In the next few slides, we will be discussing the climate adaptation performance monitoring with a focus on measurement and reporting approaches for the adaptation priority indicators. EG.11 amount of investment mobilized, and EG.11 people supported to adapt the impact of climate change. Measuring adaptation provides critical data to track the progress, guide the decisions, and ensure accountability in building resilience to climate risk. USAID uses 5 primary climate adaptation indicators under the EG.11 series, and data from these indicators supports evidence-based programming, real-time adjustments, and demonstrates the impact of U.S. government investments. These indicators are EG.11 number of people trained in climate adaptation, EG.11 number of institutions with improved capacity to address climate risks, EG.11 number of policies or standards adopted to address climate adaptation, EG.11 amount of investment mobilized for climate adaptation, EG.11 number of people supported to adapt to the effects of climate change. EG.11 and EG.11 are considered priority indicators because their results contribute directly to the climate strategy targets, supporting 500 million people to adapt to the impacts of climate change and mobilizing 150 billion in climate finance by 2030. Therefore, every activity that produces adaptation outcomes should report under these indicators as applicable. In FY24, USAID made several updates to its climate change standard indicator handbook, and it's important that the operating units and implementing partners have the latest definitions of each indicator to ensure accurate reporting and alignment with the updated guidance and requirements. Key changes include EG.11 has been retired. Any results previously captured under this indicator should now be reported under EG.11. For the FY24 reporting cycle, all results captured towards EG.11 should be reported towards EG.11. For ongoing activities with MEL plans that include EG.11, please update these plans to redirect the results to EG.11, including its disaggregate. EG.11 has been significantly updated to include all results previously under EG.11. A new disaggregate was added for climate information services to separate these results from other activities. Additionally, EG.11 now includes a new approach for calculating the reach of interventions. More details on the measurement approach can be found in the extended indicator handbook released in early October 2024, and it is available on Climate Links. And finally, EG.11 has been undergone a minor update to align its terminology with USAID private sector engagement. In the next slides, we will cover the measurement and reporting approaches for EG.11 amount of investment mobilized and EG.11 people supported to adapt to the impact of climate change. Let's take a closer look at EG.11, which measures the amount of investment mobilized for climate adaptation through USG support. This indicator helps capture the financial contributions that come from external sources influenced by USG activities to strengthen resilience to climate impacts. When we say mobilized, we mean that the investment comes from outside entities, whether or not the USG itself put in any funds. For the purpose of this indicator, we also use the term leveraged, a subset of mobilize, and it refers to new finance or investment that was mobilized by presence of a USG financial commitment, such as cost-sharing a grant or guaranteeing a loan. For EG.11.4, both mobilized and leveraged funds can be counted as long as they meet the criteria outlined in the performance indicator reference sheet. It is important to note that all reported finance must be disaggregated by public and private, by domestic and international. Here are some helpful tips and examples to keep in mind when reporting under EG.11.4. Finance can be mobilized through various investments, including grants, loans, insurance, and in-kind contributions like equipment or technical expertise. And these are some examples of what mobilized funds may support. For example, mobilizing funds for climate smart research and development, investing in parametric insurance, or funding climate information services for supply chains or disease prevention. Please remember, finance should only be reported once all contracts or agreements are signed by all relevant parties, and this is what we call financial closure. And it's important to mention that financial closure can look different depending on the type of investment. For example, a grant might have a different process than an equity investment. For more detailed guidance and examples of what constitute financial closure, please refer to the Extended Indicator Handbook. Also, USG funding cannot be counted under this indicator. For multilateral funds such as green climate funds, only non-USG portion can be reported. For example, if 10% of the fund is USG money, report the remaining 90% of mobilized funds. Additionally, in-kind contributions such as equipment or technical expertise can be counted towards mobilized finance when they directly support adaptation efforts. Now let's shift our focus to the EG.11.5 indicator. This indicator is one of the core adaptation indicators directly supporting the climate change strategy goal to enable 500 million people to adapt to climate impacts. EG.11.5 captures the number of people supported by the USG to adapt to the impacts of climate change. The support can take different forms, such as financial resources, infrastructure, capacity building, or climate information, helping individuals and communities become more resilient to climate risk. One key point to remember is that activities contributing to this indicator can be funded by direct climate adaptation programs or other programs that also build resilience to climate risk. EG.11.5 has two main disaggregates. First, people supported through climate information services, and this includes individuals who receive information to help them make decisions or reduce the risks. For example, farmers using weather forecasts to plan their planning, or communities getting flood early warnings. Second, people supported through other actions. This category covers people benefiting from actions like building resilience infrastructure, using better agricultural practices, or setting up flood defense systems. The data must be disaggregated by male and female for both of these categories as required by ADS 201. In the next few slides, we will cover the approach for measuring the reach of interventions. USAID has developed a new reach measurement approach for EG.11.5 indicator. The approach is designed to capture all individuals who have been supported through a separate intervention, either directly or indirectly. This method helps ensure consistent reporting across sectors and missions and aim to assess how many people have increase their ability to adapt to the climate impact as a result of USG support. It applies to various contexts and should be tailored based on the type of the support provided. The approach includes 5 simple steps. First, we identify what is the climate risk. And in this example, it increased flooding due to heavier rainfall. Next, we determine where it is happening. And in this case, it's occurring in a river basin or flood-prone district. Then we identify who is it affecting. And in this example, low-income families living in these high-risk areas. After that, we describe how does the intervention help. For example, your activity focuses on providing flood early warnings alert to help communities prepare. And finally, we estimate the intervention reach. We count the number of people at risk of flooding who receive these early warning alerts, showing how the activity is protecting vulnerable communities. Let's look at sector-specific examples to see how this works in practice. This example shows how to apply the reach measurement approach in agriculture and food security sector by supporting farmers, agricultural extension workers, and rural decision makers in using climate information services. These services include weather-focused and seasonal climate outlooks, which help farmers make better agricultural planning decisions and use of practices. Let's assume steps 1 and 4 have already been completed. And since the intervention focus is on climate information services, you should report your results under Disaggregate 1, Climate Information Services. Who can be counted in this example? So the direct beneficiaries will be farmers, agricultural extension workers, and rural decision makers supported to use the climate information services or receiving the inputs to adapt to the agricultural practices. The result can also include individuals reported under EG 3.224 disaggregate, individuals who are applying the climate adaptation or climate risk management practices. The indirect beneficiaries in these examples are household members of the supported farmers who benefit indirectly from improved agricultural practices. What would be the illustrative measurement approach in this example? For the direct beneficiaries, we count the individuals using sign-in sheets, attendance records, or a participants list. We also use the follow-up post-event surveys or evaluations or other forms of documentation, such as progress reports, monitoring reports, to demonstrate that participants are using climate information services or inputs to support the climate-smart agricultural practices. And if the intervention is expected to benefit entire households, we estimate the indirect beneficiaries by multiplying the number of direct participants by the average household size using available national or regional data. And in the next slides, we will ask you to try to apply this approach in a different context. Let's see if you can get it right. Here is an example from global health activity. This activity includes an intervention that intensifies malaria prevention and treatment in areas newly exposed to malaria because of changing climate conditions through case management or distribution of insecticide-treated bed nets. Since this activity is not related to climate information services, the results should be reported to Disaggregate 2, other adaptation actions. In this example, think about who can be counted. So the direct beneficiaries will be people receiving intensified malaria prevention treatment, and the indirect beneficiaries will be the household members of direct beneficiaries receiving intensified malaria prevention and treatment. Now that we know who to count, think about how to count the direct beneficiaries and what is a possible approach for counting indirect beneficiaries. So for the direct beneficiaries, we use the common practice. We count the number of people receiving the prevention or treatment using participants list. And if the intervention is expected to benefit entire households, we estimate the indirect beneficiaries by multiplying the number of direct participants by the average household size using available national or regional data. Let's take a look at another example related to disaster risk response. Again, assume steps 1 and 4 have already been completed. An activity is supporting local government to develop and implement disaster risk reduction plans in response to flooding. Since the activity is not related to climate information services, it will be reported under disaggregate 2, other adaptation actions. In your opinion, who can be counted here? The direct beneficiaries will be the number of government officials with improved capacity to develop and implement early warning systems or disaster risk reduction plans. The indirect beneficiaries will be number of people at risk of flood due to climate change with access to a new or improved early warning systems or disaster risk reduction plans. And in this example, how do you think we might count them? For the direct beneficiaries, we count the individuals using sign-in sheets, attendance records, or participants list. We can also use the post-intervention surveys, follow-up evaluations, or other forms of documentations, for example, the progress reports, monitoring reports, to demonstrate that government officials are developing or implementing early warning systems or developing disaster risk reduction plans. For indirect beneficiaries, we estimate the number of people at risk of the disaster using official population data for areas covered by the new or improved early warning systems or disaster risk reduction plans. And if population data for the at-risk areas is unavailable, use local authority or disaster management agencies' estimates. And when possible, conduct community surveys to verify access to early warning services and monitor disaster outcomes to track the number of people impacted or receiving the warnings. Here are some useful tips for accurately reporting under the EG.11 5 indicator. And as you saw in these sector examples, adaptation can extend beyond direct beneficiaries. Count household members who are reasonably expected to have increased their ability to adapt. Multiply the number of households by average household size. People trained reported under EG.11 1 can also be reported here if they apply the knowledge gained. This must be verified through follow-up surveys or monitoring reports. Individuals can be reported annually if they receive an additional benefits each year. For example, in year 1, your activity supported farmers by providing SMS weather forecast and you count these farmers. Then in the second year, you improve the accuracy of these forecasts based on feedback. And in this case, you can count those same farmers again in year 2 because they're receiving an enhanced version of the service. Beneficiaries can be counted again if any new improvements are made to deliver climate information services, such as enhanced accuracy, expanded contact, or additional delivery method, depending on the type of intervention. Always describe the climate risk being addressed and how the support reduces vulnerability or builds resilience in your narratives. All indicator reporting is required as applicable. If you have a climate adaptation result reported, regardless of the funding source. This ensures comprehensive tracking of our adaptation impacts. Reporting on disaggregates is mandatory. Select the disaggregates that best describe the results. For example, if your activity focuses on providing climate-related information, example, weather forecasts or early warnings to farmers, choose people supported through climate information services as the disaggregate. And if your activity supports infrastructure like building flood barriers or improving irrigation systems, select people supported through other actions. This way, each type of support is accurately captured. And as Chelsea mentioned earlier, adaptation is mainstreamed into other sectors, and it's important we fully capture the cross-sector climate impacts. Some sector results can also be counted under EG.11.5. For example, Feed the Future activity reporting on indicator EG3.2/24 climate adaptation, climate risk management practice disaggregate can also be reported under EG.11.5. Similarly, activities using HL8.5/2E, people benefiting from improved water resource management, climate resilience disaggregate can also be counted under EG.11.5. So this approach will allow us to measure the broader reach and impact of climate adaptation efforts across sectors and support us in achieving the USAID climate strategy goal. Let's take a look at the key actions for ensuring effective climate adaptation reporting. These actions are critical for accurately capturing the impact of our climate-related work. So start by reviewing both ongoing and planned activities regardless of their funding source to identify where climate adaptation results might be generated. Next, make sure to report on climate adaptation for any activity producing climate-related results, especially focusing on the priority indicators, EG.11.4 and EG.11.5. This applies even if the adaptation wasn't the primary focus, as long as the results contribute to the climate resilience. It is also important to share the knowledge you have gained with your colleagues and implementing partners. So encourage anyone with questions to reach out to USAID Washington Climate Adaptation Team for additional support. Take time to review your current MEL plans to identify any gaps in reporting. Make sure your measurement approach are aligned with the latest guidance on adaptation indicators and reporting requirements. Finally, as you plan to review activities, be sure to integrate climate adaptation programming and reporting requirements in your design. This proactive step will ensure that climate results are captured from the start. By following these 5 key actions, you will contribute to more accurate and comprehensive reporting, which is critical for demonstrating the impact of USAID climate investments. Here are some additional resources along with my email and Chelsea's. Please feel free to reach out to either of us for any questions or guidance you may need. Thank you.